Hi everybody, welcome back to ahaquariums. If you're new here, my name's Adam. So today I wanted to talk about water changes in the, well, I guess in the aquarium hobby, or specifically really in the planted aquarium, because there's a lot of misleading information still out there about whether you need to do water changes in a planted aquarium or whether you don't need to do water changes. And I've seen a lot of videos that say, well, it depends. Well, in my experience, it doesn't depend, because you do need to do water changes, but the circumstances surrounding when you do water changes or when you might need to do water changes, that is what depends, and that is what I think leads to a lot of confusion. So what I'm going to try and do in this video is I'm just going to try and sort of cover my experiences of water changes and what my sort of regime is with water changes and why I think that you do need to do them, but not all the time. So when should you do a water change? Well, traditionally, people would do a water change when their nitrate readings reach around 40 parts per million on a test kit. Now, the one I use is the API Freshwater Master Test Kit. Now, 40 parts per million would be around the red sort of reading down there. That's around 40 parts per million. Now, the problem with that is that if you're a planted tank keeper, as you know I am, you may never reach 40 parts per million, or at least if you do reach it, it won't be always readable on a test kit. And the reason I say that is because if I was to test any of these tanks behind me, I'd probably get a reading of about 5 to 10 parts per million of nitrate. Now, I know that in my source tap water, that reads 5 parts per million of nitrate. So the issue is, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion comes from with planted aquarium water changes, is that we never really know how much nitrate our tank is producing when we have live plants in there. So a lot of hobbyists choose to say, well, I don't have a reading of nitrate and I'm not going to change my water. But the thing is that if there's signs of algae in your tank, then that's usually an indication that there is more organic waste in there, or there's more nutrients in there than your plants can consume within a set period. And where there's surplus, that's why the algae is free to grow. So when we're doing water changes, it's not just nitrates that we are looking to reduce. We're certainly not looking to remove them with a planted tank, because removing them would be removing essentially your plant's source of food. So we don't want to do that, but we definitely want to reduce them. Now, I'll just briefly cover the situation for non-planted tank keepers. So if you're the frequency of how quickly you might reach a high nitrate reading will depend on the fish, really, and your setup. So if you've got a tank that's full of monster fish and you have no live plants, then the chances are that you could reach that nitrate reading or a high nitrate reading within a week. But if you run planted tanks with a lot of smaller fish, you might not reach that nitrate reading at all. So you really have to consider when you should do them, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about when I do them and the sort of thing or the reason why I'm doing them. So why do a lot of YouTubers, a lot of people say, well, it depends. Doing a water change depends on when you should do it or if you should do it. Well, they say this because, as I mentioned, if you've got live plants in your tank, they're going to use nitrates as food. The other reason is because every tank's different. If you've got a small tank and a high stocking load, or if you feed a lot or anything like that, that's going to cause those nitrates to build up quicker. And as I've mentioned with planted tanks, is that we never really know what that nitrate reading is. Now, a lot of planted tank keepers, especially low-tech keepers, will tend to have a higher stocking level. You may have seen that in a lot of high-tech aquascape tanks, they tend to have more emphasis on plants and less on livestock. So the waste that's being produced in that tank is going to be very low, and in turn that's going to lead to more opportunities for the plants to use those nutrients and less opportunities for algae growth, which is why in a lot of those high-tech planted aquariums we see, there is almost no noticeable algae in there. It's still there, mind you, but it's very difficult to see. So what is my own personal schedule? Well, my schedule, or schedule, depending on where you're from, is I like to do a weekly water change of up to 50%. Now, I've been asked in the comments about this, and I've said that I usually change between 30 and 50%. This isn't always true. Sometimes I might remove maybe 10% It really all depends. And to be perfectly honest, I will only do this if I feel like I need to. So I look for signs in the tank, like I'll look for things like, is there an algae buildup on the glass? And, is there sort of, a particular pile of mulm in a corner or somewhere where I can see there's a buildup of waste? That's when I'll do a water change. I won't just routinely do a water change. Now, with open top tanks, of course, you're going to have evaporation. Now, you'll hear a lot of people again say that if you constantly top off the water from evaporation, you're going to have issues with TDS, which is total dissolved solids in your tank. And this is true, but again, it depends on, and I don't want to say the word depends because you hear it a lot, but it does really depend on what your source tap water is. So when water evaporates, that's all you lose. You lose the water. The minerals will stay in the tank, which is why when the water level drops, you'll see like a scum line around it. That's the minerals which have dissolved and are still effectively present in the tank. Now, the issue with this is that if you've got hard water, now, depending on where you are in the world, you may do. If you have hard water and you keep topping up the tank and you'd never do water changes, you're just going to constantly top up those mineral levels and your water is going to become harder and harder over time. You might be able to get away with it if you live in softer water areas. So where I am in the UK, it's sort of moderate to soft, which means that in theory, I could probably get away with just doing top-offs and it wouldn't cause me too many issues. Now, I have experimented a little bit with this and I've not really seen too much difference between whether I do a water change on a routinely basis or whether I just top it off. So it's not an exact science, and this is what you need to bear in mind. It all depends on where you are in the world. It all depends on your source tap water. It's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately. So you just have to bear that in mind. But generally speaking, my own schedule is every week to 2 weeks and anything up to 50%. But I'm not completely regimented in that. Sometimes I won't do it at all. It really depends on, life commitments, work commitments. You don't have to worry too much about it when you're using planted tanks. If you've not got planted tanks, which many hobbyists don't, and I'm not judging those hobbyists, it's entirely up to you how you want to keep your fish. But of course, if you're not using live plants, then naturally you're going to have to change the water more often, and you just have to bear that in mind. So a lot of the advice out there about water changes is based on people with planted tanks saying you don't have to do them. Well, that may be true depending on where you are in the world. For most people, and if you're not sure, it's better to just do water changes and factor them in some way. So you've heard me talk a lot about nitrates. Now, nitrates are an end product of the nitrogen cycle. If you don't know what the nitrogen cycle is, I'll link a video up in the top right and you can go and check that out. So basically, when ammonia enters our aquariums, it gets converted to nitrite and then it gets converted to nitrate. Nitrate can be used as a food source for the plants. If you're not using live plants, the nitrate is just going to sit in the tank and it will grow over time, and that can also be toxic to your fish, although in much larger amounts than ammonia and nitrite. Now, it's not just nitrates that you have to worry about in a tank, in a planted tank, in any tank really. The other thing you need to be concerned about is there are trace minerals in a lot of tap waters, such as calcium and magnesium and zinc and lots of trace elements that you'll find, and these trace elements are very important to the health of our fish and of course the health of our plants and in maintaining a balanced aquarium. Now, if you're just topping off your tank, those minerals will increase and you'll have an excess of those minerals if your tap water is particularly hard. And if you don't do water changes, then you're not giving your tank the chance to replenish those minerals, and over time these minerals will deplete. Now, I'm fully aware that there's products out there that you can use to add those minerals back into your tank. So Seachem might do one for cichlids called, I think, Cichlid Trace, which adds in the minerals that they might need. And some plant fertilizers also contain these minerals as well. But they're not really a substitute for the trace elements which are in your tap water, in my opinion. So it's not just nitrates that you have to worry about, it's that these minerals which are in the tank need to be replenished, and over time they deplete. The other thing as well that you have to remember is, and I mentioned it earlier, is that nitrates in your tank, you can test them with a test kit, that's great. If you've got a planted tank, you're not going to see those readings particularly high. And the issue with that is that you don't really know how high those nitrates levels are getting. They could be way off the chart because your plants are managing that and using it as food. If you've got algae in there, chances are they are higher than you think they are, but it's being managed. So over time, your nitrates rising, nitrates can be quite acidic. They're going to be fighting against the buffer which is in your water, and the pH of your tank can lower over time because of that constant fighting against each other. A good way of buffering the pH in your tank is to do those water changes. So over time, if you don't change the water, you could end up lowering your pH, and as it gets lower and lower and lower, you may end up with a crash, which can cause an ammonia spike, which of course would be detrimental to the fish, really. So you have to really bear that in mind as well. And of course, there's other things in your tank. There might be phosphates in there, and you don't want those in your tank either. So there isn't just nitrates to be thinking about when you're thinking about water changes. So just in closing, and just to summarize really, is that if you've watched a lot of videos about water changes, including mine, and you're concerned about whether you should do water changes, the answer to your question is you should be doing water changes at some point. It is circumstantial as to when you should do them. So one way is to use a test kit. If you're getting a nitrate reading of around 40 parts per million, then change the water. If you're not getting those readings and you've got a planted tank and you never really see those high readings, maybe just put something in place where you might change maybe 10-20% of that water every couple of weeks. Maybe leave it up to a month if you need to. Just work it in with whatever your routine is, because you will see some benefits from that. But you don't have to worry about it. That's the important thing. If you're a planted tank keeper, you can go as, I wouldn't really go any more than a month between water changes. And like I say, is that I wouldn't necessarily change a large amount of water. Keep those water changes low if you need to, because that's going to be more manageable for you, and it's going to make you want to do them. But ultimately, those water changes in a planted tank or in any tank are always going to be beneficial to the health of your aquarium and then ultimately the health of your fish. So yeah, do whatever works for you. If you've got a routine in place, great. That's fantastic. That's all you can wish for, really. But certainly don't let the videos where people say don't do water changes, and even the videos that say do water changes like absolutely consistently, don't let those sway you one way or the other. Do what's right for you at the end of the day. Keep an eye on your tank, monitor the health of your fish, monitor how they're behaving. Your fish will let you know if anything's wrong. And like I say, just look for visual cues as well. Have a look at your tank. Is there a build-up of muck at the bottom? Is there like a big pile in one place that you might want to tidy up? Maybe get the siphon out and give it a little bit of a siphon out. Just keep those organics down. As I say, it's very important in a planted tank that you're not removing all the nitrates, because your plants are going to suffer. You do want to manage the organic build-up in there and the waste levels, but you don't want to remove that. And some of that mull that you'll see at the bottom of your tank, that's beneficial. It's beneficial to your shrimp, it's beneficial to your snails, it's beneficial to other detritivores that you might have in your tank as well. And it's food. It's food for those types of creatures. It's also food for your plants. So you definitely don't want to remove all of it. As I say, big part of the hobby is this massive concern about water changes. And while they are important, how you do them, whether you top off, whether you don't top off. I still top off my tanks. I have to, because they're open top. So they will be topped off, and I might do a water change every 2 weeks. But the one thing doesn't replace the other, really. There's so much information out there, and in my experience as a fish keeper I had a break, but I've been a fish keeper now for nearly 20 years, on and off. So I found what worked well and what didn't. And one thing that I've always been consistent with is I've always done water changes. Since I've moved to planted tanks, I do less water changes and less amounts of water changes, but I'm still doing them. And I will continue to do them because I think that's what's best for me. But if you don't agree, then that's absolutely fine. I've actually been running a poll on my community page just to get people's views and opinions on, you know, whether they think that they need to do them frequently, whether they do them, you know, only when needed, you know, if there's an issue with the tank, or whether they don't do them at all. So it'll be interesting to see what those results are. So definitely go and check that out after you've watched this video, and you can see the results. So until next time, thank you for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, of course, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.